The twin suns of Ashara Prime cast long shadows across the crystalline wasteland, as 17-year-old Freya Ashton stumbled through the endless expanse of broken glass-like formations. Her environmental suit was torn at the shoulder, the breech seal hissing as it struggled to maintain pressure. 3 days had passed since the transport shuttle crashed, scattering survivors across this desolate moon. Freya had watched the others head toward the beacon signal from the emergency shelter. But something had pulled her in the opposite direction, a feeling she could not explain, a whisper in her mind that spoke of desperation and hope tangled together. The wasteland stretched endlessly before her, a sea of jagged crystal spires that refracted sunlight into dancing rainbows, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Each step crunched against the fragile ground, and Freya worried that any moment the surface might give way, plunging her into unknown depths. Her water supply had run low hours ago, and the protein bars in her emergency pack were down to 2. Logic screamed at her to turn back, to follow the others to safety. But something deeper than logic drove her forward. She crested a ridge of violet crystal and froze. In the valley below, partially hidden behind a cluster of towering formations, lay a creature unlike anything she had seen in her years studying xenobiology at the academy. The being was massive, easily 15 meters from snout to tail, with scales that shimmered between deep crimson and burnished gold depending on how the light struck them. 4 powerful legs were tucked beneath its body, and wings that seemed too delicate for such a massive frame lay crumpled against its sides. But what captured Freya's attention was not the creature's size or beauty. It was the silver blood pooling beneath its body, staining the crystal ground. Freya's breath caught in her throat. Dragons. The word surfaced from ancient Earth mythology she had studied as a child. But dragons were fantasy, stories told to entertain and inspire wonder. This creature before her was undeniably real, and it was dying. She could see the labored rise and fall of its chest, hear the rattling wheeze of its breathing even from this distance. Wounds crisscrossed its body, some shallow and some deep enough to expose the iridescent tissue beneath its scales. Movement near the creature caught her eye. A smaller being, no larger than a house cat, darted around the wounded giant. Its scales were pure white with hints of pale blue at the edges, and it moved with frantic energy. The tiny creature would run to the larger one, press its head against a wound as if trying to stop the bleeding, then race away only to return moments later. The devotion in its movements was unmistakable. Whatever relationship existed between these two beings, it ran deeper than mere species recognition. Freya's training warred with her instincts. Protocol demanded she observe from a distance, document what she could, and report back to the authorities. Making contact with unknown xenofauna was dangerous and strictly regulated, yet she found herself descending into the valley, her feet carrying her forward before her mind could construct all the reasons to stay away. As she approached, both creatures became aware of her presence. The smaller one positioned itself between Freya and the wounded giant, spreading its tiny wings in a display that would have been comical, if not for the fierce protectiveness it conveyed. Freya stopped several meters away and raised her hands slowly, palms outward. She knew the gesture was human and likely meaningless to these beings, yet it was all she had to offer. "I am not here to hurt either of you." Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "I want to help. I am a healer, or at least training to be one." The larger creature lifted its head, and Freya gasped. Its eyes were unlike anything she had expected. Not the cold reptilian gaze she had imagined, but warm eyes filled with intelligence and pain. Eyes that seemed to look into her very soul and measure what they found there. The color was striking, a deep amber that seemed to glow with inner light. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, human and creature, separated by evolution and origin, yet connected by something Freya could not name. The small white dragon chirped, a sound surprisingly musical, and darted toward Freya. It circled her once, twice, then flew back to its companion. The message was clear. Please, help. Freya moved closer, her medical training taking over as she assessed the wounds. Burns from energy weapons, lacerations from what looked like metal claws, and a deeper wound near the creature's shoulder that still oozed silver blood. She pulled her emergency medical kit from her pack, knowing the supplies were meant for humans but hoping the basic principles would translate. Antiseptic, synthetic bandages, pain suppressors. It was not much, but it was all she had. As she worked, Freya spoke softly, more to calm herself than anything. My name is Freya. I come from a planet called Earth, though I have not been there in 3 years. I have been studying xenobiology, the science of life from other worlds. Though I must admit, nothing in my textbooks prepared me for meeting someone like you. The creature remained still as she cleaned and dressed its wounds, only occasionally rumbling deep in its chest when she touched a particularly sensitive area. The small white dragon watched intently, sometimes bringing her fragments of crystal that glowed with soft light. When Freya crushed one experimentally, it released a gel that had remarkable clotting properties. She applied it liberally to the deeper wounds, amazed at how quickly the bleeding stopped. Hours passed as she worked. The twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, painting the crystal wasteland in shades of orange and purple. Freya used the last of her water to clean a particularly nasty wound near the creature's foreleg. Her throat was dry, her hands ached, but she felt more alive than she had in months. This moment, helping this magnificent being, felt more real and important than all her years of study. As darkness fell, the small white dragon curled up near Freya, its body warm against her side. The larger creature watched them both with those amber eyes, and Freya could have sworn she saw gratitude in their depths. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Her supplies were depleted, and the creatures were not healed enough to move. But for now, in this crystal valley beneath alien stars, Freya allowed herself to hope. She had found something extraordinary in this wasteland, and somehow she knew her life would never be the same. The scarlet dragon closed its eyes, its breathing steadier now, and Freya leaned back against a smooth crystal formation. Above them, 3 moons rose in sequence, bathing the valley in silver light. And in that moment of peace, Freya felt the faintest whisper in her mind. Not words exactly, but impressions, gratitude, recognition, the beginning of understanding. She was not alone in this wasteland. None of them were. Dawn arrived with the sound of engines. Freya jerked awake, her body stiff from sleeping against the crystal formation. The scarlet dragon was already alert, its head raised and nostrils flaring. The small white dragon launched itself into the air, circling frantically and emitting sharp warning chirps. Through the morning haze, Freya spotted 3 aircraft approaching from the east. They were not rescue shuttles from her colony. These craft were sleek and black, with designs she did not recognize. As they grew closer, she noticed weapons mounted on their undercarriages, and her blood ran cold. The aircraft split formation, 2 circling high while the 3rd descended into the valley. Freya scrambled to her feet, positioning herself between the craft and the injured dragon. It was a futile gesture, she knew, but something in her refused to step aside. The aircraft settled onto the crystal ground with barely a whisper, and a hatch slid open. 4 figures emerged, and Freya's first thought was that they were human. Her second thought corrected that assessment. Almost human. Their proportions were slightly off. Limbs too long, fingers too many, and eyes too large with vertical pupils like a cat. They wore form-fitting armor that seemed to shift colors to match their surroundings, and they carried weapons unlike any Freya had seen in the colonies. One of them stepped forward, and when it spoke, the words came from a translation device at its throat rather than its mouth. Step away from the asset, human juvenile. This organism is claimed property under Salvage Protocol 7 of the Consortium Treaty. Freya felt anger flare in her chest. This is not property. This is a living, intelligent being that needs medical attention. The being tilted its head in a gesture that might have been curiosity. Your emotional response is noted but irrelevant. The organism is genetic property of the Terraforming Initiative. It was created to serve a specific function and has been operating outside designated parameters. We are here to retrieve it. Created? Freya looked back at the scarlet dragon, understanding dawning. You made them. You engineered these beings. For what purpose? The being seemed to consider whether to answer. The project designation is atmospheric reconstruction through biological catalysts. These organisms were designed to transform hostile planetary atmospheres into habitable environments. Their respiratory systems process toxins and release oxygen at rates far exceeding mechanical systems. Their presence can reduce terraforming timelines by decades. Freya felt sick. You created sentient life as tools, as machines. The beings exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Sentience was an unintended side effect. The base genetic template came from a species discovered in the Sculptor Galaxy. We enhanced their terraforming capabilities, but did not anticipate the development of higher cognitive functions. This particular specimen, the Alpha Unit, began demonstrating problem-solving abilities and emotional responses far beyond design parameters. It escaped our facility 6 planetary rotations ago, taking an immature second-generation specimen with it. The white dragon, Freya realized. These creatures were not just survivors, they were refugees fleeing captivity and experimentation. Another of the beings raised its weapon, pointing it at the scarlet dragon. The Alpha unit sustained damage during initial retrieval attempts. Its biological value remains high despite impairment. The juvenile specimen's value is negligible. It may be terminated if it interferes with retrieval operations. "No!" Freya shouted, spreading her arms wider. She knew it was pointless that she was one unarmed human against 4 armed aliens. But she could not stand by and watch. "You cannot do this. By what authority do you claim ownership of living beings?" The lead being regarded her with something that might have been amusement. "By the authority of creation and investment. These organisms represent decades of research and considerable resources. Their genetic sequences are proprietary. Now step aside or you will be classified as an obstruction and dealt with accordingly." Behind Freya, the scarlet dragon stirred. She felt more than heard the rumble building in its chest, a sound that made the crystal formations around them begin to vibrate. The small white dragon darted to Freya's shoulder, its tiny claws gripping her suit as it hissed at the intruders. Then something remarkable happened. The scarlet dragon rose to its feet, wounds still weeping silver blood, but its stance defiant. Its wings unfurled, and despite their damaged state, they were magnificent. Spanning nearly 20 meters, the membranes caught the morning light and seemed to glow from within. The dragon opened its mouth, and sound erupted from its throat. Not fire, as Freya might have expected from Earth mythology, but something far more extraordinary. The air itself seemed to shimmer and warp around the dragon as it released a concentrated beam of superheated atmospheric pressure. The blast struck the ground between the beings and Freya, melting crystal into flowing glass and creating a barrier of intense heat. The beings stumbled backward, their weapons tracking the dragon but not firing. "Do not damage the Alpha unit further," one of them commanded. "Use containment protocols only." What happened next would be burned into Freya's memory forever. The white dragon launched from her shoulder, flying directly at the beings with a speed that defied its small size. It released its own blast, tiny but concentrated, striking one being's weapon and melting the barrel into useless slag. The scarlet dragon moved with surprising speed for something so injured, positioning itself to shield Freya with its massive body. She felt the heat radiating from its scales, felt the vibration of its breathing, and realized with absolute certainty that this creature was choosing to protect her, just as she had tried to protect it. The beings regrouped, spreading out to flank them. More aircraft were approaching in the distance. Freya's mind raced, searching for options. Her emergency beacon. She still had it clipped to her belt. If she activated it, colony security would respond. But would they arrive in time? Would they even help against what appeared to be a legally sanctioned retrieval operation? Her hand moved to the beacon. But before she could activate it, the scarlet dragon did something that changed everything. It lowered its great head, bringing one amber eye level with Freya's face. Then impossibly, unmistakably, she heard a voice in her mind. Not words in any language she knew, but meaning that bypassed language altogether. Trust. Bond. Fly. Freya did not hesitate. She climbed onto the dragon's back, finding purchase between 2 of the large dorsal spines. The white dragon settled into her lap, chirping urgently. The scarlet dragon's wings beat once, twice, and suddenly they were airborne. The beings below shouted commands and energy weapons fired, but the dragon moved with impossible agility, dodging the blasts and climbing higher. Freya clung to the spine in front of her, wind whipping her hair and stealing her breath. Below them, the crystal wasteland spread out like a sea of rainbows. The aircraft were pursuing, but the dragon seemed to know exactly where it was going. They flew over ridges and valleys, past formations that sparkled like captured starlight. Freya saw movement below, herds of strange 6-legged creatures she had never seen documented, fields of plants that grew not from soil, but directly from crystal substrate. This moon was more alive than anyone had realized. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the dragon began to descend toward a canyon whose walls glowed with bioluminescence. They passed through a narrow opening and into a cavern system that took Freya's breath away. The walls were covered in living crystal formations that pulsed with light, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberately artistic. And there, in the center of the largest cavern, were more dragons, dozens of them, ranging in size from as small as the white dragon to even larger than the scarlet one. Their colors varied wildly, Deep blues, vibrant greens, patterns of purple and silver. Some had 4 legs, others 6. Some had 2 wings, others 4. They were not all the same species, Freya realized. They were refugees from multiple projects, multiple experiments, all gathered here in secret, all fleeing the same fate. As the scarlet dragon settled onto the cavern floor, the others approached. Freya slid from its back, her legs shaky. The dragon circled her, curious but not threatening. The white dragon chirped and flew among them, and Freya realized it was communicating, telling them what had happened. The scarlet dragon collapsed, its strength finally exhausted. Freya rushed to its side, checking the wounds she had dressed earlier. Some had reopened during the flight. She looked around desperately, knowing her supplies were gone. Several smaller dragons approached, carrying in their mouths the same glowing crystals the white dragon had brought her before. They placed them carefully near the wounds, then backed away. Freya understood. She crushed the crystals, applied the gel, and worked to stabilize the scarlet dragon as best she could. As she worked, she became aware of a presence in her mind. Not intrusive, but gentle, like someone knocking politely at a door. She relaxed her thoughts, and suddenly she was not alone in her own head. Images flooded her consciousness. She saw the dragon's creation in sterile laboratories, saw their dawning awareness that they were prisoners, saw their escape plans, their losses, their determination to survive. She saw the bonds they formed with each other, families created not by genetics but by choice. And she saw what they wanted from her. Not servitude, not ownership, partnership. They needed someone who could navigate the human world, who could advocate for them, who could help them find a place where they might live free. In return, they offered knowledge, protection, and something Freya had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Purpose. She placed her hand on the scarlet dragon's scaled neck and felt the warmth beneath. Yes, she thought, knowing they would understand. Yes, I will help you. Together we will find a way. The dragons around her hummed, a harmonious sound that resonated in her bones. And in that bioluminescent cavern, surrounded by beings that should not exist, Freya Ashton made a choice that would reshape the future of 2 species. The hunt was far from over. The Consortium would not stop searching. But now the dragons had something they had never had before. A human ally who saw them not as property or projects, but as people. The Consortium returned with greater force 3 days later. Freya had known they would. In the cavern, she had worked tirelessly with the dragons to prepare defenses, though what defense could truly stand against advanced technology and legal authority? The scarlet dragon, whom she had begun calling Ember in her mind, had recovered enough to move around the cavern but was far from fully healed. The small white dragon, Frost as Freya now thought of him, rarely left her side. Together they had formed a connection that transcended species barriers. Through their mental link, Freya learned that Ember had been the first success of the terraforming initiative, a proof of concept that had exceeded every expectation. Her respiratory system could process atmospheric toxins and release pure oxygen at rates that would take mechanical systems centuries to achieve. But with that success came awareness, intelligence, and eventually the desire for freedom. The other dragons in the cavern had similar stories. Some were from the same project, genetic siblings to Ember. Others had been created for different purposes: ocean purification, soil enrichment, mineral extraction. Each had been designed as a biological tool, and each had awakened to find themselves trapped in that designation. Their escape had been coordinated, planned over months of secret communication. Ember had been their leader, the one willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. Now gathered in this hidden sanctuary, they faced an impossible choice: surrender and return to captivity, or fight and likely be destroyed. Freya refused to accept either option. She stood at the cavern entrance as the Consortium fleet descended, a dozen ships this time instead of 3. Her emergency beacon had brought help as well. Colonial security forces had arrived, though their 3 small patrol ships looked pitiful next to the Consortium armada. Behind her, the dragons waited, their scales glowing in the bioluminescent light. Ember stood at her side, and Freya drew strength from her presence. The Consortium landing party was larger this time, led by a being that wore more ornate armor and carried itself with obvious authority. "We are prepared to negotiate," it announced through its translator. "The human colony will not be held responsible for harboring stolen property if the assets are surrendered immediately." Freya stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These beings are not property. They are sentient, self-aware creatures with their own desires and rights. Your creation of them does not grant you ownership any more than parents own their children. The being's expression did not change. Your legal argument is noted and rejected. Galactic law is clear on the matter of artificially created organisms. They are classified as intellectual property. Their genetic sequences, their biological functions, all are protected under Consortium patent law. From behind Freya, one of the colonial officers approached. Commander Darius Okonkwo was a veteran of the colony's early settlement days, a man who had seen his share of impossible situations. He cleared his throat and addressed the Consortium representative. With respect, this situation may be more complex than simple property retrieval. These creatures have demonstrated intelligence and autonomy. There are precedents for granting provisional personhood status to artificial beings that achieve certain cognitive thresholds. The Consortium being turned its unsettling gaze to Commander Okonkwo. Precedents that apply to mechanical artificial intelligence, not biological constructs. These organisms were grown, not programmed. They are advanced animals at best. Then let them prove otherwise, Freya interjected. Give them the standard sentience tests, the same evaluations you use for first contact with new species. If they pass, you must acknowledge their right to self-determination. The being hesitated, consulting with others in its party. Finally, it turned back. This is acceptable. However, if they fail to demonstrate sentience above the threshold level, they will be immediately remanded to Consortium custody. No further appeals. Over the next 6 hours, representatives from both the Consortium and the colony conducted tests. They presented puzzles, abstract reasoning challenges, moral dilemmas, and communication exercises. Ember participated with remarkable patience. Her responses transmitted through the mental link she shared with Freya, who then translated for the observers. The tests were designed to be nearly impossible, calibrated for species with radically different cognitive architectures. Yet Ember solved puzzle after puzzle, demonstrated understanding of complex ethical frameworks, and showed creativity in her problem-solving approaches. When presented with the famous trolley problem, a moral dilemma involving choosing between two harmful outcomes, Ember's response stunned everyone. Through Freya, she communicated that the premise of the problem was flawed. The scenario forced a choice between evils while ignoring the possibility of finding a third option, of changing the rules of the situation itself. Was that not what she and her fellow dragons had done by escaping? They had refused to accept the binary choice of servitude or non-existence and had instead created a third path. Freedom. The Consortium representatives exchanged glances. The colonial observers looked impressed, but the most telling moment came during the empathy assessment. Ember was shown images of beings in distress, both familiar and alien. Her responses were measured through their mental link, and the results were undeniable. She felt compassion, could identify suffering, and expressed desire to alleviate pain even in creatures entirely unlike herself. She was not a sophisticated animal. She was a person. As the sun set on the 4th day since Freya had first found Ember bleeding in the Wasteland, the Consortium representative delivered its verdict. The Alpha unit and associated specimens have demonstrated cognitive function above the threshold for provisional personhood. However, this creates a significant legal complication. These organisms were created using proprietary genetic sequences and considerable investment of resources. Simply releasing them without compensation would set a dangerous precedent. Freya felt a spark of hope. So you acknowledge they are people, not property, but you still want payment. The being nodded. The terraforming initiative has invested over 30 million credits in this project. Some form of compensation must be provided. Commander Okonkwo stepped forward. The colony is prepared to offer a settlement. We need terraforming assistance. Our current mechanical systems will take another 50 years to make this entire moon habitable. If the dragons were willing to assist voluntarily, as paid consultants rather than owned assets, it would accelerate our timeline considerably. We could offer them full citizenship in the colony, legal protection, and compensation for their work. Freya looked to Ember, their mental link carrying the question, "What do you think? Would you and the others be willing?" Ember's response was complex, layered with nuance. She and her kind had fled specifically to avoid being used as tools. But working voluntarily as equals with rights and compensation was entirely different. It would give them purpose beyond simple survival. And more importantly, It would establish a legal precedent that could protect other created beings in the future. Through Freya, Ember communicated her acceptance, but with conditions. The dragons would work to terraform the moon, but they would do so on their own terms and timeline. They would have autonomy over their methods and their lives. They would be granted full legal rights, not provisional status. And they would have the right to reproduce, to raise their young as they chose, without interference or ownership claims. The Consortium being considered this. After a long pause, it responded, "These terms are acceptable, contingent on the colony providing compensation equivalent to the research investment. Financial arrangements can be structured as a long-term repayment plan." Commander Okonkwo nodded. "We can work with that. We will draw up formal contracts with representation for both the colony and the dragons. This will be a historic agreement, the first of its kind." As the Consortium ships departed and the colonial vessels prepared to return to the settlement, Freya stood with Ember on a crystal ridge overlooking the wasteland. Frost perched on her shoulder, his warm weight comforting. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "You did it," Freya whispered aloud, knowing Ember could feel her thoughts. "You won your freedom." Ember's response carried warmth and gratitude, but also determination. "We won it together, your species and mine, and now we have the chance to show others what is possible when different kinds of beings work as partners rather than masters and slaves." Freya smiled, leaning against Ember's scaled side. She had come to this moon as a student, uncertain of her path and her purpose. She had stumbled into a wasteland and found a broken creature that should not exist, and in helping that creature she had found herself. The colony quickly adapted to its new residents. The dragons established a community within the network of bioluminescent caverns, but they also participated in settlement life. Ember became something of a celebrity, her story spreading through the human colonies and beyond. Other artificial beings previously classified as property began citing the Ashara Prime precedent in their own legal battles. The terraforming initiative was forced to restructure, treating its creations as employees rather than assets. And Freya found herself at the center of a new field of study: interspecies diplomacy and cooperation. She became the primary liaison between humans and dragons, translating not just language but culture, needs, and dreams. Years later, standing at the edge of the now fully habitable moon with Ember beside her and Ember's children playing in the grass nearby, Freya reflected on how far they had come. The wasteland was gone, transformed into grasslands and forests, rivers and lakes. The dragons had fulfilled their original purpose, but on their own terms, as free beings choosing to shape their world. And humans and dragons had learned to live together, not as masters and servants, but as partners in creating something neither could have achieved alone. Ember nuzzled Freya's shoulder, her scales warm in the afternoon sun. Through their bond, still as strong as ever, came a simple message: "Thank you for seeing me, for helping me become who I was meant to be." Freya wrapped her arms around Ember's neck, breathing in the scent of sun-warmed scales and crystalline dust. "Thank you," she replied, "for teaching me that the most important discoveries are not made in laboratories or textbooks. They are made in the moments when we choose compassion over convenience, when we see the person beyond the label, when we dare to imagine a better world and then work to build it." Above them, dragons soared through clear blue skies, their wings catching the light. And below, humans and dragons worked side by side, building a future where creation did not mean ownership, and where every sentient being had the right to choose their own destiny. The Scarlet Wanderer had found her home, and in doing so had changed the galaxy forever.